Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to share some gel paste techniques using these fun new neons gel pastes from Lisa Horton Crafts. There are 8 gorgeous neon colors here, and you can see that they come sealed. And when you open them up, they're really nice and creamy. These are so much fun to work with, and the colors are fantastic. The bonus part of these neons is they also glow in the dark. So it's a really fun way to add not only a neon element to your cards, but also a glow in the dark element. So I'm going to use these in a few different ways. One of the ways I want to use them is to just put those neon pastes onto cardstock, and then I like to die cut them. I'll use them for backgrounds or I use them for die cut embellishments. Now, I could just use one color all on its own, but I really love when using different pastes, especially ones with different colors, is blending those colors together and just seeing the combinations of those colors streak together. When die cutting those embellishments, I just think it makes them look a little bit more interesting. So I have a palette knife here that I'm using to blend them onto cardstock, and I'm just using Hammermill Cardstock here. It doesn't need to be any special cardstock. I'm going to put them on here, and then I'm using a Simon Hurley paste tool to get a nice thin coat of that paste onto that Hammermill cardstock. And then rather than waste the paste that's on my tool, I'm using another piece and I'm just cleaning off my tool as much as possible, getting that paste off of here and creating another background. And to be honest, this is one of my favorite backgrounds that were created in this video. I just love how you still have that neon color, but it almost looked like it was pastel neon. It was really, really cool. And of course, because we're not wasting that paste, it's a great way to get just some more mix of the different pastes to use for your die cut embellishments or to use as a background. So all of these Hammermill cardstock pieces are 5.5 inches by 8.5 inches. They're a half of an 8.5 by 11 sheet. And I'm doing several of them when I'm putting several colors on each one, and I'm doing 3 colors per piece here. I'm doing them in kind of rainbow order. So I'm not doing something opposite of the rainbow. I'm doing the green, blue there. The first one was the pink, the orange, and then the yellow. I just want to have the colors transitioning from, similar colors on the rainbow or close to on the rainbow so that I'm not going to end up with mud. I do several different backgrounds like this till I have each one of these colors used. And that way I have a lot to choose from when I'm creating my cards and when I am doing my backgrounds. Now, when you're working with pastes, and especially these gel pastes, you want to make sure that they are 100% dry before you start die cutting them. When you're die cutting, you get a lot of pressure from that machine. And often with gel paste, it can feel like it's totally dry, but it's not completely dry all the way through. And I am doing thin coats here, so it does take a little bit less time to dry, but to make sure that there was no chance it was in any way, shape, not dry, I let them dry overnight. So I did this one afternoon in order to craft and create the next day, and let it dry overnight. So I was absolutely certain that this was 100% dry. Look at that background. Isn't that so cool? I just love that one. So once I did those backgrounds with just my palette knife on the cardstock and the Simon Hurley paste tool on the cardstock, I decided to put it through a stencil. Now this is a great way to add a pattern. Now, not only do you have the pattern from that stencil, but you also have the dimension from the stencil. So your gel paste piece here is going to be a little bit raised. So I'm picking 4 different colors here. And again, I'm kind of going in rainbow order-ish. Obviously, pink isn't necessarily right next to yellow on the rainbow, but I know that when I move my paste tool back and forth and blend them together, I'm going to get some orange tones. Same with the yellow and the blue. I know they're not right next to each other in the rainbow, but mixing them together, you're going to get some green tones here. Now, there wasn't much paste left on that palette tool, so I just cleaned it off on a wet cloth. And look at that. That is one of the ones that you definitely want to make sure to let it dry overnight, because there is that dimension when you use a stencil. So this is the next morning. These are all of my backgrounds here completely dried. And I really love the streakiness and the blends that you get when mixing these two together, or mixing the colors together. So I quickly turned my lights off. I still have a window behind me, so it's not completely dark in my craft space, but you get an idea of that glow in the dark element to these pastes. So for this larger stenciled background here, I wanted to create two backgrounds with it. So I cut them down, or I cut one down to 4 inches by 5¼ inches. The second one here is a little bit narrower than 4 inches, but I planned on die cutting this one anyways, and the die that I plan to use is a little bit narrower, so it's going to work fine for the background that I'm creating. Now, you could leave this background just as is, but I wanted to share with you a fun way to use gel pastes. Because gel pastes are glossy, they don't have any tooth to them, they're really fun for doing gel paste resists. So I have an ink blending brush here. I'm just using my tacky mat, and I'm putting some black soot distress ink right over that entire background. And right off the bat, it looks like I messed something up because it totally covered that gel. And even just using a dry paper towel, you really don't get the vibrancy. But when you add a damp cloth and really clean that background off, you get a lot more of that color back. But the background of that piece is black. Now, you wouldn't be able to do this on black cardstock because these gel pastes are transparent. So you would be able to, or you'd see that black cardstock through that. It would show up as a completely different color. So by doing this on white cardstock first and then using that black ink around it, you really get the combination or the contrast of those beautiful bright colors against that black. And I love black with bright colors. And these neons especially do not disappoint. Now, I'm going to use several different die sets for creating my cards today. And one of the ways that I figure out what I'm going to cut out of what piece is I take my die sets, I'll take the dies out, and I'll just lay them on the backgrounds in the areas that I want to die cut. Because I have some combinations and blends between the different pieces, I want to utilize that with my die cuts. It's always fun when you're creating your own backgrounds to be able to customize it and create something that you don't necessarily have, or you can't necessarily create with just plain cardstock or even ink blending. This has a completely different look to it. It has the gloss from that gel. It has that glow in the dark fluorescent color from that gel. And then it also has the streaky blends between those gel pastes. Now, they die cut beautifully because I didn't use a really thick coat of this gel paste. It's a nice thin coat. It die cuts just like regular cardstock. So you don't need anything special to die cut it out. And I'm gluing these pieces together the same way that I glue together my regular die cuts with just plain cardstock. I'm just using that Barely Art glue with that fine tip bottle and layering all of my pieces together. I'll set that aside and then start working on my card base, or the layers for my card base. So for this particular one, I'm using that layered iris die set. This is from a release about a year ago, I think. I have another video, or videos that I did using this release. I will link to one of them at the end of this video. Now, because I did the emboss or the gel paste resist for my background for this, I have some black die cut accents that this particular iris is going to go on top of. So to tie that in with the flower, I used a black Posca pen and just added some dots to that iris. It's just a fun way to incorporate that black, get it so that it ties all in together, and it just takes the card to the next level, or that iris to the next level with those little dots in there. I think they're absolutely adorable. So my gel paste background there was 4 inches by 5¼ inches. I trimmed a mat done with black cardstock down to 4 1/8 by 5 3/8, and I'm just gluing all of the layers here. For the focal point where my iris is going to go on, I have the Nested Birthday Celebrations die set. So this is 2 ovals that kind of crisscross each other, and they create a really unique shape, as well as a unique background for my iris to go on. I didn't want to have my neon iris or neon blended iris right on top of that stenciled background, because there wouldn't be any separation from it. So by putting that black background there, it really gives or makes that iris really pop on that background. And I absolutely love the look of it. And that background, the stenciled one, definitely coordinates with it. We've got very similar colors to it, but we're not having neon on neon competing with each other. That black really adds a striking background to it. So with everything glued together, this is the final result of that card. And I just love the colors that that iris turned out. It's one of those things that you probably couldn't recreate exactly the same ever again, because when you're putting paste onto a background, you have a little control over how it blends together. but you can't completely control it. It's going to do what it's going to do. For the second card, I'm using the nested or the layered anemone die set, and I'm putting it onto some curvy rectangles. I have them pre-die cut. One of them was done out of the stenciled netting background. And the other one was die cut out of that background that I was creating when I was cleaning off my tools and just mixing all those colors together. And they blend together really, really nicely, even though I have two of those neon backgrounds right on top of each other. Because the one where I was cleaning off my palette tools is a little bit lighter, it just has a different color tone, a different lightness to it. So when I have the stenciled one on top of it, it doesn't look too odd. They coordinate well together. So I have my anemones here that are already die cut, ready to go. I'm going to layer them together. And these are not necessarily colors that I would regularly work with. I'm not a yellow and orange person, so I'll do it sometimes because it's necessary, but it's not something that I'm drawn to. But by adding that pink to it, I absolutely love the way that those anemones, I keep stumbling over the word, turned out. And them with that yellow center, they just create such a beautiful, vibrant floral that, in my opinion, just screams summer. So once I have the flowers glued down to the stems, I'm going to add those little leaves on there. And then I wasn't intending to put sentiments on these cards, but that bottom of that card just looked like it needed something. So I figured it was perfect for adding a hello here. So I die cut one of the layers from the hello out of that neon background, or one of the neon backgrounds, and then one just out of white cardstock. So that's going to be nice and striking right on top of that neon shadow. So my last card had a lot of neons with black. This one has neons with white, and you can see that it has just a completely different vibe. Now I wanted to add a little bit of glitter to the center of the flower, so I'm using the Lemon Fizz Dazzle Gel. This is another gel paste. It's colored and it has some glitter to it, so it's going to add some sparkle as well as a little bit of texture to the center of those flowers. For my third card, I'm using the All Year Round Blooms die set. This has several different dies for florals that have different sizes to them. They're great for layering together. I have them all pre-die cut out of that piece or that background that I'd cleaned off my palette knife. So I have a lot of combinations of colors to layer together. I'm also still using that Nested Birthday Celebrations for the base of this. And this one could easily be a vertical card or a horizontal card. You can pick and choose which you prefer. I tend to prefer vertical cards. I'm not really sure why, but you could easily twist this and turn it into a horizontal card if you wanted. So I have some of my layers as well as my background trimmed out of or die cut out of the neon backgrounds that I had created, creating a lot of different color variation. It's going to tie in beautifully with the florals that I have done. So I put everything on the base of my card and I'm ready to layer my florals together. Now, one of these flowers has petals that almost look like they're leaf shapes. So right at the top of the screen there, I have a background or a die cut flower that is actually not going to be used as a flower. I'm going to cut it apart and just use it as leaves for tucking in. Now, it is a very bright green. It'd be more bright than I normally would use for leaves, but it was the closest thing to a leaf color that I had from these neons. And we're only seeing little hints of it, so it's going to work perfectly. Because I added black to some of my layers here, I have black centers for the inside of my florals that are going to just tie in with that black. I also didn't want to add any more neons to these florals, so by adding that black there, it kind of grounds them a little bit. So with these florals, I like to use my fingers to curve my petals just to give them a little bit of dimension, a little bit of movement. Now, sometimes I'll curve my petals before assembling flowers that layer together. Sometimes I will do it after. For this particular video, I decided to do it after, so I layered my small flower on top of the bigger one, held that center together, and then worked around the petals of the flower to add that curve to them. And this just gives it some natural dimension. Now, if you wanted to ensure that that dimension didn't ever flatten, you could add some foam pop dots underneath there. I typically don't. I typically just leave it as it is, and I don't find too much trouble with them flattening. I'm only gluing the center of the flowers to the card so that I have that dimension there. Once I have my florals done, I'm using my fingers again to add just a little bit of dimension, a little bit of curve to the leaves, and then I tuck them underneath the flowers. So when I cut my pieces apart, I paid attention to where the edges that were die cut. So those are the pieces that you're going to be seeing on the outside. The pieces that were trimmed with the scissors are going to be tucked under the flowers, so we're never ever going to see that. And really, anyone that doesn't know this die set would never know that they're not leaf die cuts. So I did a really bad job filming that part there. I'm a little bit off camera, but that is the final result. And again, those leaves are a little bit brighter than I normally would do for leaf colors, but for neon cards, I think it works well. To add just a touch of sparkle, I'm using some stickles on the centers of the flowers, as well as the little center or the little dots around the center of the flowers. Again, just to add a little bit of sparkle to it. And then I'll set that aside to completely dry. And the result is some gorgeous neon florals with some neon leaves and a little bit of sparkle in the center. And I love, again, the black behind those neons, just really make them pop. For my last card, I thought the neons were absolutely perfect with the sea coral layering stencil and embossing folder. One of the things that I absolutely love with fish is when you go into the pet stores and you see the ones that have the lights that make the black light, I think it is, that make the fish look neon or just really see the color. So I kind of wanted to emulate that with this particular card. So for most of the layers for my stenciling, I'm going to be using some Cloud 9 matte blending inks. I am using Sugar Candy here. And anytime I'm using the matte blending inks, or really any ink that I'm doing ink blending for, I'll typically choose an area that I want it to be a little bit heavier and then work my way out and have it lighter. That way I'm getting a little bit of visual dimension just by having some darker areas and lighter areas. So for this particular layer, I made sure to be darker towards the base of the coral and lighter towards the outside part. Next color here I'm using is Margarita, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to be heavier towards the base of this area and lighter towards the outside. So before I started any stenciling, I went through the stencils and decided which ones I wanted to do in the neon gel paste and tucked those to the side. Those will be stenciled last. We want to make sure that we have all of our regular ink done first, and then we will do the gel paste last. Because those gel pastes, not only are they going to take a while for it to dry between the layers, but they're also going to add some dimension, which is going to affect stenciling of other layers. So this layer here, I'm stenciling it with some Cobblestone matte blending ink. Once again, making it darker in the areas that I want it darker, lighter in the areas where I want a little bit of a highlight from the light. So the next layer here I'm doing in Anthracite, and Anthracite is almost black, but it has a little bit of a green tone. It's a really interesting looking color. So I wanted this to be more the area that has shadows. So I specifically chose one of the layers that has or looks like it might be some shadow between some of the coral or some of the rocks or some of the elements. For this next layer, I'm going to use some painted eggshell. So this is a nice, beautiful blue. I have some stencil brushes or ink blending brushes here that I only use for the matte blending inks or oxide inks. These inks are a dye pigment blend, so you do not want to use your ink blending brushes that you would say use for your dye inks or your ink blending brushes that you would use for your interference ink. You need separate ink blending brushes for these inks, as well as needing separate brushes for the interference inks. You don't want to contaminate your pads by mixing and matching those ink blending brushes. This next layer here, I am using Garden Sage. This is another beautiful pale green. I'll often use this one with greenery when I'm doing stenciling with some florals. I really love that green color. Again, with all of my layers here, I like to make sure that there's some areas that are lighter and then some areas that are darker. So this next layer here, I'm using some Pina Colada. This one is a nice bright yellow. And it wasn't until after I was done that I realized there was an area towards the right-hand side that I actually missed. But you're never actually going to see it because there's so much going on with this background that it's actually not even visible. I did, however, use a dry cloth and clean off my stencil, and I went over that with some Sweet Treat interference ink. This is just going to add an area that has some beautiful shimmer to it. This next one here, I want to use some Regal Gray interference ink. So this one looks gray on light or white cardstock, and on the darker areas, it's going to have a purple shimmer to it. So by adding these interference inks, I'm just adding different textures in different areas, just some things to make this background really interesting for the eye. So we're going to have some areas that are the matte color, some areas that have the shimmer from the interference inks, and then some areas with the neon gloss. So the first neon gloss I'm using here is the Cerise. This is a beautiful, vibrant pink. I'm using my palette knife here to make sure to get a nice even layer. I'm taking this stencil off and I'm going to go and wash it right away, as well as washing my tools. I waited about an hour and a half between these layers. I wanted to make sure that that layer was dry before putting this next layer on. And what you actually can't see on screen here is my layer must not have been completely dry, because when I take the stencil off from doing this apple, which is this bright green, there's a tiny little area in the center of the pink that some of that gel paste came off. So you do want to make sure it's completely dry, and I thought it had been because I waited an hour and a half, but that area was not quite dry, which is one of the reasons why I waited an entire night before finishing off my card once my layers were done here. So I thought I was going to finish with that apple neon, the green neon, and then I decided I wanted just a touch more sparkle, so I wanted to add bubblegum dazzle gel to one of the areas in the bottom. So I have one of my stencil layers here. I am using some painter's tape to tape off the areas that I don't want to get this gel on. And then I'm going to add a layer of this gel, and then I will be waiting for the rest of the night till the next morning to emboss this piece. I want to make sure it's 100% dry and there's not a chance that it's going to ruin my background. Because we've done so much work for this background, we don't want a chance that we're going to ruin it by putting it in an embossing folder and having the pressure of our die cutting machine. So better safe than sorry, and wait the rest of the night for that to completely dry. But while we're waiting for that to dry, we can work on putting together some of our embellishments. So I have the Underwater Marine Life die set here. I'm using the angelfish. The background, it was die cut out of some of those neon backgrounds that I were created. And then the front piece is just some black cardstock. Again, I just love the look of neons or bright colors with black. So I thought these would be perfect, and they would be perfect on the front of our under the sea background or sea coral background. Now another option here would be to use white with the black, but once again I wanted to incorporate those beautiful neons in another place, and I like the look of them with this black. It coordinates beautifully with that background. So I'm going to layer these together and then just set them aside. So once I have my card together, they are ready to go to add to the front of that card. Again, using that same liquid glue, putting them together and then just setting them aside. So this is the next morning. I have a 5x7 card base here. I've made a mat that is 4 3/4 by 6 3/4 inches, and I've trimmed my sea coral piece, or I'm going to trim my sea coral piece to 4.5 inches by 6.5 inches. I want to make sure that I have a nice mat around it. It's going to incorporate the black from those angelfish with that black mat. You could easily choose to do one of those neon colors on a piece of cardstock for the mat, but we have a lot of neons, a lot of colors going on here. So I thought a black mat would be perfect. It would just frame it really, really nicely. So because our stencils were on white cardstock, we have a white background, and I didn't really want to have a white background, a white ocean. So I took some almond frosting matte blending ink and just did a little bit of ink blending on the bottom part for kind of the sand or the ocean floor. And then around the top part, I'm just using some distress ink in tumbled glass and a really large ink blending brush. I'm making sure that it's nice and dark around the outside, but lighter towards the center. I'm not trying to cover those areas that we just created. I just want to make sure that we have some blue water. Then we can take our piece here, line it up with that embossing folder, and run it through our embossing machine. And I'm using a Platinum 6 machine here. When I'm using Lisa Horton 3D embossing folders, I have a piece of index stock that I just keep with my stuff, and I use that to get the right sandwich for these particular folders. There's the odd time where I don't actually need it. For the most part, that's absolutely perfect. And here is our stenciled and embossed piece. And just like was planned, we waited the whole night, made sure everything was completely dry so nothing was ruined with the pressure of that embossing machine. Love it when that happens. And then we can glue that to the front of our card. So I put my acrylic block on there just to hold it down nicely while waiting for that layer to dry, and I'm going to position my fish. Now that one little tiny area for the coral, I did off screen take a little bit of that gel paste and fill it in, but it's not perfect. You can see that that it was filled in. So rather than having that exposed, I'm just putting a fish over top of it so you can't necessarily even see that it was there. So as I'm moving fish around, the one reason why I'm not moving that one around is because it's hiding a little error. It's a little creative opportunity, if you will. Now, as if there wasn't enough going on with this card as it is, I wanted to add just a couple other little features. I have some black enamel accents that I'm using for the fish eyes. When these are die cut, there's a hole put there, and I don't really want to see what's underneath that. So the black enamel accents works perfectly for that. And then I'm using some glossy accents to add bubbles for those fish. Again, the glossy accents is clear, so it's not going to add any color, but it adds that glossy dome, that glossy bubble, and it just adds a little bit of extra texture. So here's the finished card. I wanted to show you these gel pastes after sitting in the lights for probably about 10 minutes and turning my lights off, and you can see that they glow beautifully. Here is the finished card, nice and dry, and I just love that background. Those neons just add to it so nicely, and it creates a beautiful look, and I'm so happy with the final result of them. I just love the vibrancy of it. Then we have our one done with the year-round florals, as well as the layered anemone and the iris. Now, I know I have a couple favorites from this particular set. I want to know what your favorites are, or your favorite neon color. So I just flicked the light off there just so you could see that the cards do actually have some glowing properties to them because of that gel paste, which is such a fun feature. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.